all-staff webcast this evening with Director John Malloy. I'm Ryan Bird from our Communications and Public Affairs team. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Just before we get to the Director, just a few notes about this evening. We'll be hearing from the Director, obviously momentarily, about the rollout of his Learning Center plan and get an update on where we are in the process before we head into the summer. We'll also be taking your questions about learning centers in the second half of this evening's webcast, as well as any other questions you may have on your mind. When it comes to questions, of course, we will try to answer as many as we can. Also, just a reminder, and I'll have this at the end as well, once we wrap up, there will be a link to a very short survey. If you could take a minute or two to fill that out, we'd really appreciate it. We're increasingly using technology like this, and while we're still in the pilot stage, we really need to hear from you on what's working and what may not be working. With that out of the way, now I'd like to introduce Director John Malloy. John, did you want to start with a few words?
Great. Thank you, Ryan. And thank you to all of you for participating this evening. I know that we are in that part of the year. It's warm, the sun is out, and we're looking forward to that summer vacation that for some of our staff is just around the corner, realizing that for others of our staff, you will be moving into high gear as we prepare our schools and do various work projects preparing for September and the return of our students. So thank you. Thank you for not only participating today, but also for your efforts and all that you bring to our students and to our communities. Because as I say every time I have a chance to speak with you, we are the ones who serve our students and our parents and our communities, and regardless of what your role is in the TDSB, thank you for that which you provide. So I wanted to offer some insight in terms of where we are in the Learning Center process, and then, as Ryan suggested, to have as much time as we can for questions that you might have. So first of all, let me just, if you'll bear with me, just to offer a little bit of a review of what we're doing and why. So you know we're moving into 4 learning centers. Those 4 learning centers will have 140 schools in each. We will have 7 superintendents working in those learning centers with our executive superintendent who oversees it. And we're also going to be ensuring that as many of our resources can be shared with you through the Learning Center, such as our psychological staff or our social workers or our coaches and many more that I can describe as the questions emerge. Why are we doing this? Because we believe that by creating relationships between our service at the central level or at the system level and connecting directly with you at the school level, those are the relationships that we're trying to form so that we can ensure that we are raising the bar on what we offer to our students and to our families in our schools. So service excellence is key. And we're going to be working with all of you, our staff, to be sure that we are doing everything we can to support you in that excellence and in that service. And we'll be able to speak more about that as our evening moves forward. Just a couple of other really significant reminders to the work that we're doing together. It's about leadership, and it's about a shared leadership. It's not about a hierarchical one, though, as I've said earlier to you, those of us in positions of leadership do have a significant role to play in terms of creating conditions in our system, but it doesn't fall on all of our shoulders to do things that don't involve ownership, responsibility, and a real sense of collective wisdom as we move forward. That's the kind of leadership that we are speaking about. That leadership honors voice, as I said, creates conditions that are optimal for learning, and it truly respects the experience and expertise of all. So what we're basically saying in this very foundational vision is that each and every one of us who are providing important supports and services in the Toronto District School Board need to come each day to school or to our departments in a way that brings about this kind of engagement with one another and with our students. That's the leadership that we're speaking about, and we look forward to working together to create those conditions or to enhance those conditions in every school and every department. So why is this leadership important? It's important because it's based upon the fact that through positive relationships, we can make anything happen. Through trusting relationships, we can really move mountains. And where that trust doesn't exist, where there's not that sense of collective wisdom in the community, or where we're not able to share our expertise, we believe the opposite can happen, which doesn't lead to the kind of service that we're searching for. So leadership that then allows us to focus on relationships, relationships that allow us to serve our students more effectively. Which then takes us to our core purpose, which is each and every day we improve. We learn and we improve. And as a learning organization, anytime we take in new learning and new wisdom, we apply that learning and wisdom, and we ensure that we then are able to know our students better, or provide a different kind of support to our parents. Or maybe through the different processes that exist at the system level, we're able to support our principals and vice principals more effectively. So again, regardless of your position in Toronto District School Board, and I know that when we have an all-staff webinar like this, you may be a teacher in a school, you may work in a central department, you may be one of our office administrators, you may be a caretaker, but we need all of you. And together we need to work collectively to support our students. So that is basically our vision: leadership, relationships that move into improvement. Well, what is it that we're intending to improve? And that's where I think it's important for me to clarify a few very significant points. All students reading by the end of grade 1 is absolutely necessary. That goal is based upon our understanding that what happens in the earliest years, our work with our families, childcare, kindergarten, grade 1 in terms of oral literacy and literacy, is so significant. And many of you have a direct role to play in that particular goal. All staff learning in teams. Why? Because alone we can only do certain things. Together, as long as we put critical questions on the table, we can move further. We can analyze and assess the best ways to proceed. Through the trust that I've spoken about, we can move those mountains because we don't stop until we understand the best way to move forward. And that happens because we are a learning organization who creates focus and decides together how to reflect upon what happens based upon our actions. And then through that reflection, we apply our learning in the next phase. Another goal that we are really striving for is the notion that all students in each and every one of our schools need to experience a caring adult. I know we struggle often with the concepts of mental health in our schools, or we worry that we're not providing the supports that our students need. And we sometimes struggle if we don't believe we personally have the training to meet that particular concern or issue. But one thing that we can all pay attention to, especially if you are a staff member who works in our schools, and that is that each and every one of our students has someone to turn to in the school to provide the support required, a listening ear, or a connection to a more appropriate support if that's what the student needs. We also believe that we need to strive to provide learning opportunities for our students, which are based on a very strong foundation of literacy and numeracy, but move into the world of critical thinking and creativity, citizenship, character, communication, problem solving, and that can be done with the support of technology. So we're really going to be looking at our learning opportunities for students, and we're going to be working with you to transform some of those learning opportunities so that our students can grow in those areas. And of course, all students graduating. That is our ultimate goal, and then a life beyond our secondary schools where they can contribute, be strong and effective citizens, to be resilient people with self-esteem and confidence, because that's part of what we do together. Our work is privileged. Our work is privileged because we serve students. And anywhere I go, I share the same message. We have the opportunity to change lives together. And what we're trying to do in TDSB is take a look at all of the expertise that exists, all of the learning experiences that have happened historically, and we're leveraging those in a way that we hope provides clarity of focus. And just if I can repeat before we open to questions, service excellence working together to determine how to best serve our students and communities is paramount. Secondly, shared leadership, positive relationships that lead to effective and focused improvement in each and every school. The only way we can do that is when those of us in positions of leadership create the right opportunities for all staff to give their voice, experience, and expertise to this endeavor. And that's the part that's going to be emerging over next year. Some have asked, well, isn't this simply a plan that is being communicated now and we can just move on? Well, not exactly. Because we're a learning organization, and because we will, as we learn forward, bring that learning into our service, we are in a continuous state of improvement. We are in a culture that only accepts excellence, and we understand that only together can we make it so. So that's basically what we are attempting to do. I know that it's going to take some time for our entire system to understand deeply how we are going to make this happen. I'm hoping that you're already seeing signs of the collaborative work that is on the table. And Ryan, I think that that is the best intro I can give. And again, for some of you who have heard me before, you might hear some repetition, but that's also a part of focus, that we really are striving for very precise ways of moving forward so that our students are best served, that our families and communities are engaged, and most importantly, you, our staff, are supported by the conditions and culture that we create together.
Thank you for that, John. We now are accepting your questions. If you'd like to ask any questions about learning centers or any other topics that are on your mind this evening, now please, you'll see our staff that are looking after the chat have indicated that you can ask your questions now. So while we're waiting for those to come in, I want to touch on something that you mentioned, and that was about service excellence and that responsiveness. You know, I guess that's hand in hand. It's both for parents and staff, but I guess one benefits the other. Right. That response times. Are you looking at timelines for that? Or is there, you want a response in X number of days or what have you, or how much have we drilled down on that front at this point?
We've already begun the work to define and clarify what do we mean by service excellence. What are the conditions or the criteria that would allow that to be better defined? And it's going to be, again, part of our process. But let me offer a few thoughts. Again, based upon relationships, when we know each other, it's easier, I believe, for us to engage each other. When we don't know each other and emails fly back and forth or voicemails are left, it's harder, I think, in a larger system to actually be perceived as responsive if it's not clear who should be responding. In what time frame should that response happen? If there isn't a clear answer, what's the initial communication followed by a communication that resolves the matter? These kinds of collaborative and communication realities are something that we want to focus on. Another thing, again, you might be thinking right now about one of our processes or procedures that people complain about. You may actually agree that there are some things that need to be adjusted there. You might not actually know with your own team how to bring about discussion around that particular issue so that we can bring a change forward. So this kind of service excellence process will include some clarification around the kinds of relationships we're trying to create, the type of learning environment for all staff we're trying to support, as well as some clarity of expectation around what communication needs to look like and how it is that we might proceed, again, involving you in the process. But more importantly, it also wants to offer you voice so that those things that you believe need to be considered can be considered, because we all have opportunities to put these issues on the table.
Perfect. Thank you, John. Julia says, hi, John. Last time you had a webcast, I asked a question about equity and how it was going to look since you have made it prominent when speaking with various groups. She's just saying, I just wanted to say thank you for following through. I can see it in action as the new learning centers are coming together. Do you want to just discuss a little bit about where you see equity going as it pertains to the learning centers?
Thank you, and thanks for the comment. We really appreciate it. This is what we're trying to do in terms of the importance of equity. So in terms of our improvement work, we're talking about achievement that really deepens the learning supported by technology. We're talking about well-being for staff and students and our parents and communities and how we improve that in a very focused fashion. And we've also been talking about equity, which in this discussion is asking all of us as staff to ask some really significant questions. Who isn't achieving as we'd like them to? What might the barriers to that achievement challenge be? What bias might each of us hold that could potentially become an obstacle in this process? And how do we ensure that any of our improvement work is including a real, tangible discussion at each and every staff that allows for us to focus our efforts in a way that brings about the kind of equity of access, opportunity, and outcome that we are striving for? We want each and every one of our students to achieve. We want each and every one of our students to improve in terms of their well-being. And we know the only way that will be so is if we're intentional in terms of our work. So what we've been working on through the learning centers is how do we support each and every one of our school communities to engage in this very significant dialogue regarding the students in their classrooms that leads to really focused efforts in terms of improvement. And to that end, we've expanded our equity department that will not only work centrally, but will also work through the learning centers with schools. We've expanded the role of our central coordinating principal in each of our learning centers, who will have a very keen eye on this significant equity question. We will ensure that each one of our coaches, who will be serving all of our schools, will have the training required to provide the kind of support to all of our staff in terms of engaging in this dialogue. Again, it's a harder dialogue to engage in because in order for us to truly move to being the most equitable communities possible, it means we have to challenge ourselves. It's not just about looking at our students or supporting their families, but it also means challenging our own perspectives and our own bias that sometimes may be getting in the way of the kind of achievement and well-being that our students deserve. So we have remained consistent with the commitment that has been in TDSB for a very long time. We've looked at the wisdom that has existed in the department presently, and we've looked to see how we can continue to expand the relationships I've talked about earlier so that through these relationships, coach with teacher, principal with principal, learning teams that exist throughout the system, this concept of equity can be brought to the ground, focused on students in communities, honoring context so that the kinds of improvements we're speaking about can truly happen throughout the system.
Thanks, John, and thanks for that, Julia. Next one from Ingrid. Where will the 4 learning centers be located?
Thanks for the question, Ingrid, and it's one that I think has been asked of me the most when they want to know where the building is. And actually, there is no building. The learning centers is a way of working. It is not a building that people go to. Let me explain. The majority of people who will be working in the learning centers are actually staff who spend most of their time in schools. They are not staff who spend most of their time in offices at the system level. So there really is no building called Learning Center 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. However, we will be assigning staff to the learning centers. The staff in the learning centers will be able to become a learning community focused on schools in a certain part of our board. We will create opportunities not only for learning, but for discussion and for other appropriate dialogue to happen. And so what that will mean is we have to be very intentional about how we're defining collaboration and how we're enhancing communication so that we're actually not relying on a physical building when we use the term learning center. So learning center then is about the people coming together with their expertise to support students. bringing their wisdom regardless of what their role is, and because of those relationships and the trust that exists there, improving our practice. That's the definition of a learning center. People will have spaces to sit, to meet, to do email, to make phone calls in various parts of our board, but that's actually not the focus of the Learning Center work.
So it's more a virtual concept.
Correct.
If you will. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, John. Next up, will more coaches be added? Right now there's 60 K to 12 and 20 early reading coaches. This person says, seems like a small number for such a large board.
At this point, you may know that we have expanded this hugely. So even though it may still appear to be not enough, we could always probably wish for more human resources. We do believe that this is going to move us forward in a really concrete way. Because part of what this Learning Center strategy is attempting to do is not just create one person who can respond to your needs, or one person who can support instruction, or one person who you call when a certain matter is on the table. There will be point people for all of that, and we will be clear about that as we move into September. However, part of what we're trying to do here is create the synergy that comes with people learning together, that raises the bar on what we all know and understand due to the wisdom that is shared there. So that is also part and parcel of this. So even though it may appear that the 80 coaches are not enough to serve our 580 schools and programs, if we actually do the math of that, it allows for coaches to be in your school very, very regularly. And of course, that will be differentiated based upon the needs in a particular school. So it may be perceived as not enough, but it's way more than we presently have now, and that's why we're going to be able to move forward, learn from our practice, learn from our implementation, make decisions around how we'll move forward after this first year of implementation.
We have another coaching question. Hi, John, I'm a new coach. I'm wondering if there will be a manual with policies to follow, or will we be collaboratively building that manual?
In relationship to the coaches, as I see on the question, it's also about this person happens to be a new coach. So when it comes to creating manuals, we do need clear expectations, and that will continue to emerge. However, we also need, within those clear parameters, room to move. That's the positive side of learning. We have to be able to move within clear expectations. So when we answer the question, will there be a manual? No, because a manual might be perceived by some as very prescriptive. And prescription is not what we're getting at here. Clear expectations, yes. Accountability, absolutely. An expectation through the learning that I've described, that everyone applies that learning to their practice, definitely. An ability to ask questions through the process, communicate what you don't know, reach out for help when required, that again is part of this design. So what we will do together is, one, I will communicate with the senior team some really significant expectations, and we will determine appropriate accountabilities. And then once those parameters are clearly decided, then lots of room to move within. So more to come on that, but again, we're focusing on achievement, we're focusing on well-being, and we're focusing on equity as I've described it. Depending upon who you are, you might have greater expertise or experience in one aspect of this over another. Not a problem. We'll work with you as long as you're open to this learning journey. And again, for those of us who are not explicitly connected to instruction in the classroom, that's when we ask of you to think about service excellence in the context of the processes and procedures you follow in your departments, figuring out who you need to collaborate with in other departments so that how we support our schools is second to none. That's our plan.
John, you mentioned relationships before. One of our viewers is asking, how do we go about planning to build those relationships that you're talking about?
I think that the most important reason why we're trying to move into the centers is because if I, for example, am too far removed from your community, I've been visiting ward forums, for example, and I'm getting to travel all across the city, so I'm gaining some really important insight. However, I don't live close to every one of our communities each and every day. So even though I'm reaching out to you through this technological means, I can't be in the kind of relationship with all of our employees, all of our students, and all of our communities as I might like to bring about the kind of effective service I'm talking about. So that means we need to rely on our principals, our staffs in schools, our communities who connect with those schools, our superintendents who have the systemic view but also work daily in a smaller number of schools in the system, our learning centers that will have staff in many departments that will hopefully continue, because we're already doing this in many ways, build those relationships at school level so that everyone knows who to call, who to reach out to for advice, and how to proceed. So the way I believe we can build those relationships is, one, allow for more decision-making to happen closer to schools. Two, to ensure that that decision-making is done collaboratively. Three, that the direction that comes from system level is clear enough, but not so narrow that it takes away from our need to honor the local context. And by providing that important direction at system level, but then providing lots of space and room at local level, that's where the relationships can be formed, and that's where I believe the improvement can take place. So we're going to be focusing throughout the system on what it means to be, as I suggested maybe earlier, honest about what we can offer, what we don't know how to do, ask for help, not be afraid to make mistakes, reflect what learning has taken place when issues emerge, and communicate broadly and wisely so that our communities understand what it is that we know and understand and how we're proceeding.
One viewer has a question about central departments. Philip is asking, without getting into specifics, will there be some central departments that will be being decentralized with the new learning center model?
The way this works is there is a central connection to everything and a local connection to everything. Let me explain. So we still have a special education department that sits centrally, but we also have superintendents and learning centers with a coordinating responsibility around special education, and we will have consultants within those learning centers. Those consultants will still connect at the system level for their own learning and understanding as well. So what I'm saying is that you will find all of the departments that will be in the learning centers, there will be a system connection. That's how we stay one. That's how we stay one board that's coherent and working well. Some departments will not have their work in the learning centers. Some departments will be completely at the system level because it makes sense for them to be there, because the work that they do is supporting the whole system, and it's one that doesn't have necessarily the face of the community front and center. So again, not everyone is moving to the learning centers. However, even those particular departments are looking at point people within the central offices that could again expedite, make more efficient communication and responsiveness. Remember, I'll repeat from a time ago, that the reason we're doing this is we want to be more responsive as a system to our schools and communities. We want to be more engaging, and we want to minimize bureaucracy. And what I mean by that is those processes and procedures that may have made sense at one time, but may not make sense any longer, or when there are really significant questions that need to be answered, and too many people are involved in the process to get those answers, or when it's not clear who to talk to, there's a lag time in this responsiveness. That's why if you are school-based, the role of principal and superintendent becomes pivotal, working with the trustee. And if you're department-based, working closely with your team, as well as with other departments as required, becomes necessary. And if you're somebody who is working both at the system level and at the learning center school level, once again, we'll work closely with you to be sure that we've provided the kinds of structures to support the kind of learning that brings about the excellence that we're discussing.
Thanks, John. Thank you for that, Philip. Next up from Joe, in your previous webcast to staff, John, you stated that the classroom needs to drive technology. Joe's wondering if TDSB I-Team staff can be looped in with that. He's saying he's always had issues trying to get simple things done that would make his job easier in the classroom. The response I commonly get from the help desk is that it's not our policy to do that. Recently, asking for some security permissions to pause the printer queue, wasn't able to do that. He's saying it's something simple that be able to do before and now we can't. Just one example, but as far as kind of, you were saying that responsiveness, I guess how does that work into on the IT side of things?
So once again, we are examining all of the processes that presently exist where there isn't a relationship attached to it. Again, the people who respond to a multitude of phone calls every day do the best they can to fulfill the expectations of our system. But that's what I was talking about earlier when I say that to say that something is policy, that is then needing to be followed with a rationale. If something is procedure or a process, once again, there needs to be a rationale. I really need to be clear that being responsive does not mean we can say yes all the time. In fact, it simply means that when we have to say no, it's not just because ... but there's actually a communication that can follow. So that's one thing that I think is really important for me to communicate, because the last thing I'd want to be saying is that being more responsive means that we can actually say yes to all. That would never be effective in a system like ours. So when I asked for each department to think about its practice, especially as it relates to how we are perceived in terms of our service, one of the things we're exploring is how can we get more immediate feedback by those of you we serve to see how well we're doing. That may be where it is determined that we need to change something, or that we have a process or procedure that simply isn't meeting our needs anymore. That's where also the relationship piece comes in, because again, when people know one another, it's easier, I believe, for people to respond to each other. So, to answer the question explicitly, we are in a period of change. That change is causing some anxiety. We're going to need patience, because as you say, will we loop everyone in? Yes, but that's going to be part of the work moving into next year. We're going to figure out ways to be sure that we gain from you where we are succeeding and where we still are challenged in terms of the service we provide, and we're going to do our very best to be explicit about how we're going to change and to communicate that change broadly. That's the plan.
Thank you for that question. Next up from Ariel, what technology update ideas do you see in TDSB's future, whether that's electronic attendance, cash-free schools, e-readers instead of textbooks? Where are we going, and is this near future? Is it significantly down the road?
I would say, Ryan, it's near future. We are trying to ensure that our environment is completely effective for the kind of technology we know we need to use. And that's where we're working on our wireless issues throughout the system, so we move to an equitable place in terms of that. And we're not there yet. I mean, I'll just put that on the table. We have a plan to get there very soon, but we're not there yet, and that is front of mind. Because once we have the highway, if you will, it opens more doors on what we can do next. The second part, though, is actually transforming our practice. We may say as a group of staff that we like more technology, but then we might look at our practices, and our practices actually might still enjoy paper. Our practices may enjoy photocopying. Our practices may enjoy using some technology, but also holding tightly to other practices that have been around for quite some time. So part of this transition is to shift some of our practices so we can actually afford more of the technology. In the learning environment, this is really significant, because I will say wherever I go that a textbook becomes obsolete the moment it's published. Our world is changing fast, and we're going to need to think through how we need to shift our practice, supported by technology, to provide the learning opportunities for our students. We need to think about the professional learning that needs to happen in order for this to take place. And we can't just use technology to substitute for similar processes in classrooms. So in other words, are our students invited to own the learning, supported by staff? our teachers, and our other educational staff? Do we allow them to pose critical questions and wrap the curriculum around those questions? Do we utilize classroom, community, and through technology, the globe, to help them extend that learning? And then how do we invite them to think and create and communicate so that the learning is made even that much deeper? Technology drives all that. So it's not just about purchasing technology, it's about transforming practice, it's about changing spending habits so that we can move forward in the way we desire.
That's great, John. Next question. Will you be visiting each central department or division to explain how the new learning centers will affect the role of the department division and what changes staff can expect?
I will probably have to rely on connections like this because of how many departments that we have and how many schools that we have, but I'll also try to do some physical connecting as well. Let me explain. Right now I'm working with the senior team to clarify expectations around the implementation. And the number one expectation is the building of relationships that I've described, the sharing of leadership as we've discussed, and then bringing back the wisdom and learning that's emerged from that. So this is a reciprocal process. I will be utilizing opportunities like this. We're exploring next year, maybe going more deeply into certain topics so we don't leave them as broad, but actually go deeper around various things that some of our staff might be interested in. So we'll be looking to you for some help regarding that. I have opportunities to connect with leaders, formal leaders in our departments. Because obviously I can do that in a way that allows me, for instance, to have a meeting with all senior department leaders or all principals in one place. But I'm going to have to respectfully say that I'm going to need to rely on some of these dynamics in order for me to connect with you, to hear your questions, to provide response. And I'm also going to ensure that everything that emerges from you through your formal leaders that comes to our senior table, we figure out ways to effectively communicate back to you that we've heard what you've said, we've adjusted our response because of what you said, and that we continue to want your feedback in order to improve. So let me leave it to say that I know my physical presence is important. I'm going to beg your indulgence that I can't be everywhere, but I'm going to try with my wonderful team to do the best I can to spread this message as far and wide as possible, but also to keep reminding you that you have voice in terms of how this unfolds going forward.
We have a question from one of our primary teachers when it comes to reading. You say you want all children reading by the end of grade 1. What are your thoughts regarding reading recovery? Most students will learn to read and write regardless of how they are taught, but what about the lowest achieving 20% of students? These students need targeted, individualized intervention, and reading recovery is a proven successful intervention. Will reading recovery be expanded to once again service more students as it used to?
We're looking at a number of different strategies, reading recovery being one of them, and we will communicate very widely what those strategies are. So let me start by saying we know that effective program in classrooms in the kindergarten, grade 1, 2 years are key. Oral language is absolutely important in terms of that development, and we have quite a bit of experience and expertise in our system. Working with our child care sector, which is very much a partner with us, as well as our families, also does quite a bit to move this very, very important work forward so that all of our students are reading by grade 1, by the end of grade 1. And reading recovery is a proven strategy that we are using in some of our schools. So the answer is that we're not looking at just one strategy, we're looking at multiple strategies. We will include reading recovery as part of that, but not every student might have that level of intervention, but rather others will be explored as well, which we'll get into more detail in the fall. But I do want to say that we still want to support every single classroom to provide the most effective program so that the majority of our students are successful, and then when intervention is required, that intervention is precise, and the teachers in the classroom partnering with teachers who are providing the precise intervention can work as a team to move forward. We're also exploring, for instance, how our speech and language pathologists can work closely with our kindergarten teachers to provide foundations for this work. Again, this is something that's happening already throughout the Toronto District School Board. We're just looking to see where there are proven practices that are working, what can we do to strengthen them and ensure that more students have access to them as required.
Ariel has a question about mental health, and this is our first mental health question of the night. Is there a plan for students who miss large amount of school as they struggle with mental health, as far as any ideas to change the school structure to make programs more flexible?
You know, we have a lot more opportunity around flexibility when it comes to serving each and every student than we might always understand. So what I mean by that is we do follow ministry policy and regulation. And of course, we are required to fulfill certain things as we move forward. But especially when mental health issues emerge and there is the need for accommodation, I think one of the things we need to spend a little bit more time on is what is flexible? How can we make the work more accessible? How might we partner with our families to ensure that students are successful even when these challenges emerge, and explore some of the creative ways that we can intervene? Right now, there appears to be some belief that the only places where there can be certain kinds of intervention, like I'm describing, is in alternative settings. And yes, our alternative settings in some cases do provide effective service in this regard, but some of that may also be provided to our schools as long as we provide our schools with the support required to make that so. So I think that exploring what is possible and really determining how flexible we can be is something that we can take back and ensure that we're providing more information about, more learning conversations around, so that we are seen as more responsive because of how we're respecting what each and every student brings as they work through their learning in our schools.
Great, thank you for that question. We do have a lot of questions coming in. We are trying to get to as many as possible.
So I'll be a little quicker in my responses.
We do have one. How will we know that the Learning Center reorg is going to be better and more efficient? Is there going to be research and organization design to support this change, to support our students to achieve their goals?
There's two things we're doing. One, you know, we have a very effective research department that follows all scientific methodologies, gathering of information and so forth, so we can measure a couple of key components significantly around responsiveness, around engagement, around minimizing bureaucracy, and what impact has it had. That we will continue to do. But we're also understanding that the whole concept of responsiveness, positive relationships, shared leadership that brings about appropriate action is one that also has a very personal impact. And so we're exploring right now software that would allow us to send a couple of questions to a large portion of our community to get pretty immediate responses back, and from those immediate responses be able to learn quite quickly what we're doing well, what we aren't doing so well, and how we might proceed. So not only will we continue to do this from a research perspective, but we're also going to do it from a much more, I'll say, qualitative perspective, whereby instead of you having to fill out a 10-minute survey, you might have to answer 3 questions, send it back to us, and we can flip that around into a response that guides our behaviors, guides our implementation quite quickly. And then as long as we communicate back to you what we've learned and what differences will happen because of what we've learned, that is what we're attempting to do. I know that that may be a little stressful for some listening to this, because that may not be your experience right now in how your department operates. And so we will again be patient through the transition, but this is where we're headed.
Thank you, John. And next up, we have a question from Ray. As a senior physics and math teacher in adult day school, how can I deal with unfair, unequal, and drastic management decision and overcome backlash, systemic barrier if I want to bring positive changes, i.e. bringing new technology to the classroom teaching within the framework of TDSB policy?
So one of the discussions I've had with those of us in positions of leadership in the Toronto District School Board, whether we be supervisors or directors or superintendents or principals, that we play a really significant role, as I've said earlier, but we also have to pay close attention to how we lead, how we choose our words, our tone, our behaviors. Because we, in essence, are in a position where those things will have a profound impact on the communities that we serve, on the staffs that we work with. I know that it is too difficult for me to comment on any individual circumstance in a webinar setting like this. And I encourage all of us, in that spirit of positive assumption, that we want to work together on positive relationships. We do wish to work collaboratively to bring about better results, and there will be professional disagreements at times that might block something from moving forward in the way in which we like. This is an opportunity for us in the Toronto District School Board, those of us who lead in a formal way, as well as all of our staff, to take our rightful place at the table, bringing the expertise and experience forward and working together to a positive result. We do need policy to guide our work. We do have regulations that also direct our work. Education Act, of course, is the foundation. So I'm not suggesting that we don't have those things. We also have worked collaboratively to arrive at certain expectations. And stepping away from those expectations would not be helpful as well. So there are behaviors that we expect happen in each and every department and each and every school. But the question you're asking is, what do I do if I'm at odds with my leader and I'm afraid that if I push too hard, I won't be respected, or worse yet, something can happen to me? That's what I hear you asking. And this is again where I am inviting all of us in TDSB to gently say to whoever it is that we're in discussion with that we are working together to share ideas, to share voice, and to share experience. The answer may be no. And then my expectation as the director is that there's a rationale for the no. The rationale cannot simply be because there's a policy. There needs to be an explanation of the why behind that policy. And if the person who is giving that message isn't able to answer that question, then my expectation is that clarity is given to you on why something isn't possible. But if there's not the ability of the person delivering the message to offer the rationale for that, my expectation is that person would connect with the persons who can and then loop back and ensure that communication is clear. So what I'm saying in summary is there are directives, policies, regulations. Sometimes if it's within our sphere of influence, we can change those or work with the partners such as the trustees who work in policy to do so. But there's also a lot of room to share our experience. And that's the kind of space that I'm trying to create with all of us. And that's where I'm hoping people feel a greater ability to voice concerns. And I hope the person in a formal leadership position can hear those concerns and work together to make good things happen.
We talked about technology earlier, and Michelle has a question. If the classroom is supposed to drive technology, when will all classrooms have the necessary technology needed? Not all schools can rely on fundraising. So I assume things like laptop carts or iPad classrooms.
I will be so strong in this perspective, so forgive me if it's too strong. We don't buy technology for technology's sake. I do believe we need it, but that's not what's driving this discussion. What's driving this discussion is, what is it we wish to provide for our students in terms of the learning environment? What is it that we as staff need to support our professional work in that learning environment? How then are we transforming instruction so that the technology is required? For example, if we don't change the instruction, some of you have heard me say, an iPad is an electronic encyclopedia. What is it we're inviting our students to do? Think, create. How is it that we are using the classroom, the community, and the world through technology? And then how do we purchase technology in a way that really supports this direction moving forward? And what kind of professional learning does our staff need to make that so? We've heard that fiscally there isn't more money. So it means we have to stop spending money on certain things. And that's the challenge that I'm offering each and every one of our school communities. We can't spend money on all the paper-based products, even though, by the way, I do believe that there's a place for written material that is on paper, such as a book that a child can read. However, we need to make some changes in order for us to provide the resources technologically. Some of our schools have already made these decisions. And it's not solely based upon fundraising. It's based upon a commitment that's been made, a transformation that has happened, a change in terms of the use of our resources, and the movement forward that then catches on. And once we see, in my experience, what happens when students are engaged and the staff is engaged, then it breeds greater things. And then I see more transformation happening and different choices being made. So I hope that that answers the question on the role of technology, how we afford it, not simply based upon fundraising.
Thank you for that. Another question, any comments or updates regarding caretaking staff and underutilized schools?
To be honest with you, I would need a little bit more information to know what is actually being asked there. So unfortunately,
I guess when it comes to underutilized schools, though, I guess it's an opportunity. You know, in fact, this week at our board meeting, as part of the program and accommodation review, that starts to address a lot of that stuff that we've already started last year.
If the question is more around the notion of excess pupil spaces and our board's willingness to deal with that, we do have a 10-year strategy. The strategy is in motion. Our board is making decisions around that strategy. And as you know, we are funded by the numbers of students that we have, not necessarily by the number of buildings. And so we then can look at how we are using our human resources based upon the number of students with the budget that we have. However, this is a complicated topic, one that's not easy to answer in a systemic way in this type of setting, because there are many, many issues the board needs to wrestle with. Having said that, we do have a capital accommodation strategy. We are working through it, and hopefully that will bring about positive results moving forward.
Thank you for that question. We've also had a few questions regarding the culture of fear. Can you speak about how we're moving forward? Have we made progress? What do you see on that front?
The one thing about the culture of fear is that there's a flip side to that, and that is a culture of trust. And on our website, under our research section, you'll actually find a document that was worked on by our own research staff about how we create a culture of trust. I've worked with senior team, principals and vice principals. Will be connecting with supervisors and service departments on what those qualifications, criteria, and conditions are. Fear happens when we don't believe we have voice. Fear happens when we give voice and we believe something could happen to us. I do believe there is a profound interest in moving away from that type of culture. I do sense that people resonate with the kind of leadership I've been speaking about, which is shared. I do understand, though, that there's going to be some adjustments. And in some cases, there's going to need to be some work done to support each other while we're moving forward with this. Again, I want to be clear. Creating this kind of collaborative culture based upon positive relationships cannot allow us to always say yes. It's not a yes or no affair. It's not a positional affair. It's one where we come together to work through things. We have communities and departments right now in our board where everything is on the table, discussions are rich and robust, disagreements are professional, and the person in the position of leadership understands that there are times when they are supervising and there are times when they are learning with. And they figure out the way to do that dynamic as they lead in that particular community. That's our commitment. That's the message we're sharing. My other hope is that we share this so much across TDSB that if something emerges that doesn't align with that, said respectfully, we might be able to say to whomever we're working with, but I don't think that's the direction we're trying to head in. And understand that that's an okay thing to say. Or that they can say, I don't get what to do here, without fear that something bad is going to happen, and that support could be provided. I know that this may sound in some communities as too idealistic, but it has been my experience when this becomes an intentional commitment that we all work on, that the kind of change we want to have happen can happen.
So is it fair to say, to boil that down, if people think they are being heard and that their ideas are being listened to, that's the way to chip away at that?
Absolutely. We need to start there. And again, there will be times when there'll be disagreements. How we engage in the disagreements are key. There will be times when another person needs to be invited into the circle to help mediate. that doesn't have to be the end of the world. Those are the kinds of decisions and commitments we wish to make. And the best way to do that, again, is in your departments, in your school communities, or between departments. That's where the relationships need to be. And as a system, we're going to do everything in our power to support those informal leadership positions to realize that this is the type of community that they want and need. And by the way, I need to say this because I've met with the principals, the vice principals, I've met with the supervisors. Everybody wants to come to school and to work each day in TDSB and do a good job to serve students, and they want to be engaged. They want it to be a positive place. They want to hear laughter. They want to hear the excitement of serving students. That's what people want. So we just have to figure out how to make that happen as 100% as possible of the time.
I think that's a great place to end our questions for this evening. Thank you so much for all of your questions tonight. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. Before we wrap up, though, just some closing words on kind of going forward now.
First of all, thanks again for being here. Thanks again for asking the questions. I hope you're hearing from me, at least, responses that allow for some clarity, but also where we don't have things sorted out, a commitment that we will. And for the types of things that really do need to be part of your local schools and departments, I know we can do better. I know there's a commitment for us to do better. And I'm grateful that wherever I go in TDSB, which is in the last number of months, a lot of places, there's a real interest in us really becoming the school board that is seen as exemplary in our service to students, in our service to our community, and in our support for one another. So thank you so much, and thanks for tuning in tonight.
Thank you, John, and once again, thank you for joining us. These conversations are important. We're looking to have more of these in the upcoming months. Right now, we're piloting these, but we are looking in the upcoming months to have a lot more of these to get your input and to get the message out as best we can. Just before you go, you'll see a link to a survey on your screen right now. If you could just take a couple of minutes and fill that out, we really do want to know what you think about the timing of this, the questions asked. We want to know what you think of these so we can make them better the next time. Thank you once again for joining us tonight. Have a great night.
Thank you.